Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're integrating a, frankly, astonishingly bleak analysis. We're pulling from 29 separate files to build out a single unified collapse framework.
And it is unified. What this body of work is really claiming is that the U.S. isn't just unstable, it's what they call a profoundly brittle glass cannon.
Right.
And it's entering a collapse scenario that is, well, almost entirely leadership-driven.
So our mission here is to distill all of that dense material. We want to extract the core mechanisms, the key metrics that you really need to understand this model.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with the foundational ideas. The framework uses this concept of the gray rhino.
The high probability, high impact threat that everyone sees but, just ignores.
Exactly, and that glass cannon metaphor, that means immense offensive power.
But almost zero domestic resilience. It can project force anywhere, but it can't take a punch at home.
And the analysis tries to quantify this brittleness, right, with actual numbers.
It does. They have specific indices. For instance, the Constitutional Unraveling Index, the CUI, is scoring at about an 82 out of 100.
82. And that's not just political disagreement, it's...
No, it signals active, codified attempts to dismantle the actual checks and balances.
And we see that play out in things like the Schedule F purges, stripping civil service protection.
Right, which politicizes the entire bureaucracy. Or you look at the IEPA gambit failure. That directly caused a 43-day government shutdown.
The manufactured insolvency, a $92 billion loss.
Engineered purely by internal politics.
Yeah.
That is the definition of a self-inflicted wound.
So shifting from the structural to the psychological drivers, the analysis has this Chapter 11 thesis.
It's a fascinating lens. The state is treated like a distressed company in bankruptcy.
And the president is the debtor in possession.
Exactly. Who sees oversight bodies, the courts, the press, as creditors that need to be neutralized.
And what's fueling that strategy?
Something they term dual-track psychological deterioration. It's a clinical overlay, basically.
Oh.
Malignant narcissism combined with behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia, or BVFTD.
Yeah.
This combination creates what they call the dominance execution loop.
Which means
It means there's no off-ramp, impulse control is gone, it's
Yeah.
just continuous escalation.
So if the domestic situation is that dire, the model argues that energy has to go somewhere.
It has to. It gets externalized. War with Iran, they call it round two, is framed as a metabolic necessity.
A justification bridge.
Yes. You need it to acquire plenary authority, that unchecked wartime power, to suppress domestic dissent. The no kings protests they predict.
And the likelihood scores for that conflict are alarmingly high.
Between 8.4 and 9.7 out of 10. It's seen as almost a certainty in the model.
Which brings us to the final catastrophic escalation, a U.S. nuclear strike.
And it's not a strategic decision. The model is clear on this. It's a compulsive act after what they call an intolerable narcissistic injury,
Like the televised sinking of a U.S. carrier.
for example.
Yeah.
And Iran's predicted response is asymmetric, a high-altitude nuclear EMP,
An EMP. And they could deliver that how? A satellite.
possibly. They mentioned NORD 2 or 3, or maybe a fractional orbital bombardment system, a FOBS,
Yeah.
the fly under the radar, so to speak.
Okay, so the EMP has two pulses, E1 and E3. What's the difference? What do they do?
So the E1 pulse is the flash. It's instantaneous. It destroys unshielded microchips. All your modern electronics, gone.
And the E3.
The E3 is slower. It's a heaving pulse that couples into long power lines, and it just melts the large power transformers, the LPTs.
And you can't just replace those. They take years to build, so the grid is down for good.
For years.
Yeah.
Which leads to the final consequence, the one-year die-off. A projected 90% mortality rate from systemic collapse.
Mutually assured collapse.
That's the scenario.
So we have this terrifyingly tight coupling, leadership compulsion, domestic decay, and this catastrophic asymmetric war.
Right. And I think the core failure the analysis really leaves you with is, well, it's a political one. It's about priorities. The model points out that we prioritize incredibly expensive offensive power, things like aircraft carriers,
Over the relatively low-cost hardening of the domestic grid.
against a known existential threat. So the question it leaves you with is, what does that tension, that choice between offensive might and defensive resilience really reveal about our systemic priorities?